Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the launching event of the Political Economy Hub for Latin America and the Caribbean, an initiative from the Graduate Center community that's associated with the Stone Center on Socioeconomic Inequality, whose director, Dr. Janet Garnick, and whose associate director, Dr. Leslie McCall, are joining us today. I want to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsor for this event, the Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies, whose director, John Gutierrez, is also joining us, and whose support was instrumental, beyond instrumental, to make this event possible. Thank you so much. Today we gather to hear from Diego Castañeda Garza. Diego is a PhD candidate in economic history from the Department of Economic History at Uppsala University. He is affiliated with the Uppsala Center for Business History and the co-founder and manager of the Uppsala Seminar in Economic History. His research interests are ancient, past, and present inequality, historical energy transitions, economic development, warfare, revolutions, and political economy. He's the author of Pandenomics, Una introducción a la historia económica de las grandes pandemias, Pandenomics, an introduction to the economic history of large pandemics. And Diego will be presenting extracts from his upcoming book, Desiguales, Una pequeña historia de la desigualdad en México. In this book, Diego takes us through Mexican history from independence to the present, through the eye of the distributional forces that gave shape to its inequality and the political economy that makes it so persistent. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us and welcome, Diego.
Thank you all to come here to the, I think it's the first really public presentation about this work, and it's an honor to me to be at CUNY and to be at the Graduate Center. It's one of the centers to be if you want to study inequality, kind of like the mecca of inequality. And thank you to Osvaldo for organizing this. It was really cool to do this and to be able to give this a few months before it goes public. The book will come in November, first in Spanish, and then I think early next year in English. So I hope at least. I don't know how much time it takes to do translations, but well, I will start. This book is about it's not just about measuring inequality in Mexico in the historical context. It's also trying to find the drivers of those developments. Like the way I see it is more like a political economy history of inequality in Mexico, right? It goes through things, Mexico independence, more or less, to the present. It could be to the present, to 2022, for example, 2023, but I call it 2020 because it's already too much work to do with the data to keep updating it every time. But as you can recognize, for example, in this picture, this is a retablo de castas. This is like a very traditional way of displaying Mexican inequality in historical settings, right? When Mexico gets independence from the Spanish Empire and stops being Nueva España, it becomes Mexico. It inherits this super stratified structure in which was like race and class interlinked to create like a hierarchy for society, right? And through time, that permits other aspects of the new Mexican society and the political economy of all the warfare like revolutions, wars, foreign interventions, civil wars that we have at the time, and the consequence of that in the kind of public policy domains, like introduction of taxes, expropriations of land, expropriation of property, privatization of property, land grabs. We have all that going more or less in the entire 19th century in Mexico. So that's like the setting of the book. And to think about Mexico in that time, we need to have it in like few elements in your mind. Like it was a society of in constant domestic and foreign warfare, experiencing war and violence all the time. Mexico at that time experienced more than 150 kind of coup attempts or revolts in a span of like 60 years, for example. It changes its form of government from centralized republic to federal republic, from empire to republic, from different types of dictatorships, from complete chaos, from having an extremely large territory to have that shrink in half. So it's a state, a very chaotic state of affairs. So the country lives in a permanent crisis, in a permanent financial crisis, and in general, there's no like rule of law in the country. Like we have these different regions, like regional warlords or caudillos that actually rule the country with a central state that is super weak almost all the time. So that brings political instability. So and that political instability brings the possibility of large swings in the distribution of resources, because depending who is in power and what he's doing and what the conditions are in terms of the other factors, you end with huge redistributions or with huge concentrations of wealth. Just to clarify, in the 19th century, I mostly will be talking about wealth inequality rather than income inequality, because the data for Mexico at this time in incomes is really scarce, so it's not the best. But for wealth, it's very good, because we have a huge amount of probates and wills that we can use to reconstruct. So we will talk about methods now, just to have it up there. So at the end, in the 19th century, there was a liberalization, a liberal project for the economic development of the country that, in principle, was looking at a more equal society, a more just society, but was trying at the same time to modernize the country in a kind of the mirror of the US, like trying to create a small class of landowners or young farmers, trying to industrialize the economy, trying to move people from the rural areas to the cities, but it completely fails, actually achieves completely the opposite results. It ends concentrating land, concentrating wealth. It ends in a kind of a vertical integrated economy, which just a few families, the hacendados, famous hacendados, for example, in the late Porfiriato, control the political aspects of society, like they can influence who is the Minister of Finance, for example. They can influence economic policy. They can influence taxation. They can influence tariffs, which is a very important thing in this case, because it was the main source of revenue for most of the 19th century for Mexico. In the end, that leads to political failure, and then that will end. That will trigger, with other things, the revolution. And then the revolution will be a very brief period in which some of the aspects that can make us more equal appear. Suddenly, in this period, you start to see more progressive taxation, the appearance of the income tax, the appearance of inheritance taxes. You start to see large land redistributions, no? For example, Cárdenas land agrarian reform, all this that starts before, and so on. And then you have a period in which the post-revolutionary period in which some institutions start to appear, like this image of the main social security institution in Mexico, this is the Mexicano de Seguridad Social, LIMS, in which they aim in principle to create a more equal society, like a welfare state. But it fails. It never achieves that because of several reasons we are going to go around. And we end in current Mexico. That is a country in which we Mexicans sometimes ask if we live in a permanent inequality situation. Like if you look through time, it really seems that inequality doesn't change that much. It has always been high. And now I will enter more to the different chapters of the book, and I will show you some data, and then I hope you give me comments and ask me questions. So, well, the sources I already told you, like these are like a regular will or a probate. You have here the inventory, which gives you like all the assets that a person had, their debts, so you can actually calculate net wealth from each one. And I went through 180,000 of this, and then I digitalize and extract the data and calculate like a distribution of wealth for each year for those 200-year period. And these are the sources. If you are interested in that, we can discuss that later. And this is how it looks. This is how wealth inequality in Mexico looks through the whole period. You can see that there's some ups and downs. I mean, in the appendix of the book, you will see like some calculations of how to be sure that the measures are robust and all this, and different methods, but this is like the main result. And you can see that inequality, although changes a lot in some years, like you have spikes and some big dips, it remains quite high at a level of around 0.8 in the Gini coefficient. And if you compare that to, let's say, current Mexico, using the Credit Suisse estimates, for example, it's not that far away. It's pretty much in the same ballpark. We are talking about wealth inequality of about 0.8 for the whole 200-year periods. But the interesting here, what it was interesting to me when I was calculating this, is what happened in these moments when it changes. Because this is if we stop thinking a little bit like economists and think more like historians, these are like the changes and continuity. Like if we continue with that, inequality is high almost all the time, but something happens here. There's not like a homogeneous period. So there are moments in which inequality really increases, it spikes like in the 1830s, and there are moments in which inequality falls, like in the 1850s and 60s. And the reason behind that is the political economy situation in the country. For example, in the 1830s, we have a state that was pretty much run by the military. And like in Mexico, who just became independent, it was a threat from Spain that it was going to invade Mexico to reconquer the land. We had an attempt in 1829, for example. And then you have a lot of civil wars and infighting between groups, like liberal with centralists that had different visions of how the country should be run. And that led to the Mexican government to fear a lot the existence of coups. So that created an incentive for governments to buy the military. So you start to see that the federal budget in Mexico starts to grow. Like it becomes at one point I think just before the Texas Revolution, around 85% of the federal budget, it was going to the war and navy ministers. And if you see, you go through the probates and you go through the wills and you start to see who are the rich person in that period, you see that it's almost all generals that own big haciendas in some of the more productive states in Mexico, that, like, for example, in Hidalgo, in Puebla, in Veracruz, and you start to see that concentration of land, right? And as a result of that capture of the state by the military, in technical terms, I think it's called the formation of the fiscal military state. That's the reason behind that strike, for example. But then you have wars, like Janet was telling me about Walter Scheidel presentation here when he was talking about, I mean, his famous book, The Great Level, there is much about like wars and revolution and the effect of inequality. I think you could actually, that's what explains here. Here you have two very big foreign wars and a big civil war happening in that period. You have the Mexican-American War that actually destroys a lot of wealth in Mexico. Yeah, I mean, you lost half the territory, you will lose wealth. But you have other things also going there, right? And then you have a big civil war, but I mean, not that big, but big, the Revolution de Ayutla. And then you have a big the very big civil war, which is the War of the Reform, that actually redistributes a lot of land because you have these expropriations of land from the church that amounts more or less to 6% of national wealth just in those years that moves hands. And then that kind of confiscation gets reprivatized to a new economic elite that emerged after the Civil War, which are the liberals, led by Juarez. And then you have the French intervention, again, a very big war with huge cost for the economy that destroys the Mexican economy pretty much and cost a lot of money to the big hacendados. So that's what you see, this fall in wealth inequality. And then what you see here, like it starts to slowly roll back, is the liberalization project that starts at that point. First with Juarez and the Republic restored, and then with the Porfirian until the revolution. And then in the 20th century, it doesn't look like it was too different, or at least not in pure unit terms. It's different in other aspects. Like obviously, it was more unequal in the past. Like we had slavery and other things going on in the past and other That's pretty much chapter 1, which is an overview of these processes. And the rest of the chapters are going more like in depth into the mechanisms and the political economy situation. For this showing you the same, but in incomes, I was able to use social tables to reconstruct some of the income inequality measurements from the 19th century. Not much, but there are a lot of Mexican economists that have through times trying to reconstruct this. So you can see like it more or less looks the same. It's quite constant. I mean, you have more like it's more dynamic here because you have way more data here. You can actually see more variation. But with these estimates that doesn't have as much variation, you still see pretty much the same kind of trend, more or less at the same time in incomes. So to me, that already tells me something. But I don't know. Some people haven't agreed with this before. They see like big changes, but I see like, yeah, for some years, the trend kind of keeps by itself. Then this you will have to forgive me about this table. It's really small. You will have to trust me here, but this is just about like a little summary of these different mechanisms that explain like why inequality goes up or why it goes down, which is foreign wars, changes in taxation policy, changes in the kind of property rights of the land, changes in state capacity. Like even if they have some taxes, it doesn't matter if the state doesn't have the capacity to actually tax. So you can have a government that wants to be progressive in some sense, but it cannot tax. It's the same as if the government doesn't want to tax. Because capacity is the thing that actually drives that, right? And all these type of mechanisms. So I will skip this because yeah, it's a horrible thing. And this is probably one of my favorites, which is looking at wars and inequality. And I have this kind of theory about what you could expect of inequality, what happens to inequality depending on the type of war you have. And I think Mexico here is like a perfect laboratory case for a laboratory setting to actually test for this, because you have very different types of war in the 19th century. You have civil war, like full out civil war, the war of the reform. And so you have a small scale civil war, like some coup attempts, some regional uprisings, and you have big, almost total wars, like the war against the US and the war against France, for example, and then the Mexican Revolution, for example, or in the future. And what you see is what I call like destructive wars, which are like the war against the US and the war against France, wars that actually like the Scheidel hypothesis, like it destroys a lot of wealth, and then that's what explains the fall inequality. But you also have like extractive wars, which are wars that actually are not much destructive to the wealth. They don't destroy the infrastructure. They don't destroy they don't paralyze the economy, but they do enrich the guys who are running the war, like the military. Like that's the wars in the 90s, like the period in the 1830s that I told you about, when the military became like a big part of the state, because the fear of war or the preparations to war enable the military to become more important and to capture the state and enrich themselves by that capture, by capturing the federal budget. For me, that's like a model type of what I call like an extractive war. It's not the destruction, but the fiscal side of the war, that someone has to pay for the war. So you extract taxes, send them to the military does whatever they want to do with that. There's not an actual war, or it's just a revolt, whatever, but they capture property, they capture resources. And then what I think is more interesting is what I call the predative wars, which are wars that combine both characteristics. They can be very destructive, but they also can be very profitable for one of the sides. And to me, that fits civil wars in general. Because in civil wars, particularly civil wars in Mexico at this time, you see this dynamic in which you have the destruction, like you have a lot of debts, you have the infrastructure destruction, you have the economy getting paralyzed. But at the same time, you have this dynamic in which opposite sides are trying to capture the economic resources of the other side to use them, and then redistribute them to their own bases. And at the end, the side that wants, in this case, which is the liberals, they end redistributing the property and the wealth of the side that lose, which were the conservatives here. So in the end, who either inequality can go up and down depending on what dominates, the destruction or the kind of redistribution of the property, what's happened at that. So to me, that's influence, and that's would be chapter 3. And I don't know. I actually would like to hear about what you think about it, because this I haven't get enough comments about this.
Would you just say, what are the vertical axes below the line and above the line?
Oh yeah, this is like lesser inequality or more inequality.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, since the book is coming now and it's in Spanish, I left the Spanish graph. But, and this is just an example. For example, this is creating like you see in a social table. For example, you can aggregate people into groups. But if you do that, you can compare between the same groups at different times, and you can see how much they gain or not. For example, this huge bar, like that's the military. And that period, they just became extremely rich compared to other social classes or occupations, like service people or religious people in the churches, or artisans, or traders, or even the people in government. Like this, clearly the military was winning here a lot. And you have destructive wars, for example. This is an event study of the Mexican-American War. You can see like war, actually there's a lot of wealth destruction here. It's significant. You see the trend. I will not stop in the econometrics because that's boring. But if you do like a growing incident curve of this, you actually see like the destruction actually hit a lot, like 60% of the distribution, which are the group that actually own something. The people who own nothing, they don't lose much, but in some cases win because they were able to sell their services to, for example, to the Mexican army or to the American army in the case of the Mexican-American War. And the preventive war, this doing the same for one of the reform. And here you see, for example, that the previous group that actually was very good in the war against, in the 1830s, sorry, is the big loser here, the military, right? They are the ones who are pretty much loose in the world of reform. The liberals were not like, the military was on the side of the conservatives in this fight. They're likely the ones who lose. Who groups win? We see the emergence of hacendados, which is, will become important in the next period, which is in the Porfiriato. They start to emerge here. And here are a lot of cases, if you go through the sources, that are amazing, are super fun. For example, you know the name Limantur, maybe some of you know, the ones who know the Mexican history. He was the Minister of Finance of Porfirio Diaz, extremely wealthy man. His father was also a very wealthy man, but he was not Mexican, he was French. But he became super wealthy by selling weapons to Juarez and his side. And since the Mexican government didn't have money to pay him, they paid him with land. They were like, okay, give me this, send me weapons to the port of Veracruz, and then I will give you these haciendas that I just took from the conservative side. And then they redo the deed, and now you're the owner. So that's the emergence of that class. A lot of the hacendados became rich by this redistribution of the resources lost by the other side, which I think is very interesting and actually something that probably deserves way more attention in terms of the literature. And if we see that half, or a little more than half a century of wars, this is the distributive outcome of that. You see that almost all the entire distribution is war stuff after the wars. Comparing in the 1820, let's say now the first times of Mexican independence, the newly born Mexican Republic, to the state of Mexico just around the time of the French intervention. You see the result of that setting is that everyone was getting worse. And that's why the economy was not able to, I mean, if you look at this period from like a macroeconomic side, you will see that the economy was not growing, was controlled, well, actually was getting smaller, was shrinking all the time from up until around this time when the First Republic will start. Now, this chapter 4 is about the first, what I call the first chronic capitalism, which is the Porfiriato. I mean, a little before the Porfiriato, but let's just say that that's the classic image. This is an example of something I think is very telling about this. This is an American company that was buying land in the state of Sonora, western Mexico. This area is very important in terms of agriculture because it has two very big rivers, the Mayo and the Yaqui rivers, that were owned by the Mayo and Yaqui people, which was indigenous populations. The government sells this, like, it takes this land from these indigenous populations and then it sells to this company. It's called the Richardson Company, and they start to build here like irrigation channels and things to exploit the land. These are like the people they lost their land. Like I use this example because to me this really shows how the liberal project at that time failed. Like they have a law, 1883 colonization law, that enables whoever private party that saw some empty land and deem it like it was not used as productively as it should be, could send a letter to the government and ask, hey, I saw this plot of land and I think it's not productive enough. We can do something better with that. The government then will expropriate the land, sell it at a big discount, 2/3 of that land, sell it to a big discount to the guy who found it to be not productive, and then assign the other third to whoever they want. So this is how these very big plots of land were assigned through the whole country. And as you can tell, this is like a destitution of indigenous population, like they lost their land and the way of living. And some guys, like the owners of the regional company or other companies through the country, became extremely wealthy because they get to own a lot of natural resources. The oil, the extraction, the mining, the river for irrigation. So you have this huge concentration of land. You go through the sources, you find like around 95% of like communities, rural communities, like indigenous towns, villages, all that. They lost their lands and ended in projects like this. So the modernization project that actually had in mind create a more equal society, it really goes the other way completely, and ends creating like this massive rural, like a huge amount of rural poverty, like people without no lands. We have to remember in this period there's not like a huge monetization of the economy. They are not like selling their labor. There's not an industry yet. There are not the industries in the cities that can absorb those people. So they are just losing their way of life while these guys are accumulating a lot of land. And then when the industrialization process starts, some years later, they are the ones who profit because they own the resources. And then you have this vertical integration in which they have the capacity to extract resources from the land, and then also the money to do like the factories and things like that. And then they really profit from the industrialization. And this is one of the reasons that will at the end trigger the Mexican Revolution, this type of dynamic during the Porfiriato, in which even if the economy was growing super fast, most of the population were not benefit as much as guys like the owners of, in this case, the Richardson Company. This is just using the same case. This is like a normal panel regression, and you're showing the marginal effects of panel regression. This is what I call as another land graph, because this is expropriation of these lands that I showed you. You see the effect on wealth of the pre-1885 law. You see that pretty much what we will say are rich people in the sources, like hacendados, and the middle classes and the poor, are not statistically different in the way they hold in Sonora. After the law here, you see that there's a huge statistical difference. The hacendados became really rich, the rest just pretty much. You can actually see that happening. So if we do the same exercise, we construct a growth incidence curve for the 19th century, just for the period of the liberal project. You see that even if most quantiles of wealth are better off, you see that it's really like the top 20% that rip up the benefits. And then that brings us to the chapter 5, which is the Mexican Revolution, to be my favorite topic. But the Mexican Revolution, in a sense, is a revolution that had to be fought because the previous revolution, and that what happens in the 19th century, fails. And as I told you, the modernization project in the 19th century was supposedly to create a capitalist economy, a more equal society, more just society, or that. That was the liberals in the 19th century wanted. They failed. So this revolution starts with the same goal. They want to create a more equal society, a more just society. They want to modernize the economy, at least some part of the revolution, let's say the Carrancistas and the constitutionalists, even Obregón, etc., Sonorenses. And finally, you see that some of these ideas get done just for a very brief period of time. And here I like this, like Alan Knight, who's one of the great Mexican historians of Mexico, particularly Mexican Revolution. He has a quote in one of his books in the Cosmic Revolution, which is very nice. He says, like, he proposed a thought experiment in which if you could freeze in time 1910 and 1940 and see how much the country changed because of the revolution, you will actually see why the revolution matters a lot in terms of a more equal society. So when I was writing this, I was thinking, I think I have data to actually do the thought experiment that Alan Knight proposes. So I do it, and this one. Let's say these groups, think of social table, like these military, like peasants, construction workers. You see all the different groups, hacendados, finance, like merchants and financiers, like the government, high bureaucracy, all that. And you see how much they win or they lost. You can see what are the groups that win, what are the groups lose. For example, hacendados, really, yeah, the revolution really almost finished, not completely, but almost. Or small owners, for example, they also lose in the revolution. Sadly, they lose. But for example, ranchers, they won. They actually, the revolution was very good for them because they were the revolutionaries. They were Álvaro Obregón, they were Calles, they were a lot of the Sonorenses, for example, actually. But also like steel workers, like construction workers, peasants, they don't win as much as you would want them to win. They win. So you see that actually, when you calculate any synthetic measurements of inequality, the AG, whatever, you will see that inequality goes down in this period, and that makes it to me like a very, very important example because it shows you what policies actually work in Mexico for a time reducing this. This is the period in which you have the income tax, the inheritance tax, you have land redistributions that doesn't go like to rich people, that goes to communities, the ejido, which is kind of controversial for other reasons. So if you see like this income, for this period, we can do income, now we don't need to do wealth. You actually see that around the 30s, that is around the time in which Cárdenas take government, you see that actually these reforms that were born in the revolution take effect, and you can see that it's slightly, not much, but still like a 10% reduction in inequalities. And then it stays kind of the same. And then to me, yes.
What happened with the military? Because it seems that they are always winning.
Yeah, I mean, that will happen when you have wars, like militaries, they are useful when you have wars. So in a context, like in a historical context, like the Mexican one, in which you are fighting all the time, if you want them to keep fighting, you have to pay them more. Like if, for example, in the case of the Porfiriato, the federal army was very kind of ill-equipped. It was not as good as you would expect them to be. So they had to start raising the payment for the soldiers, so they wouldn't desert and join the constitutionalists. For example, the army, think of Villa, Pancho Villa's army, the División del Norte. The soldiers that were fighting in División del Norte, they earned better wages than the soldiers that were fighting for the federal government. The same would be said from Obregon's army or the Revolutionary Army. So then, if you are the federal government, you are Porfirio, you are Huerta, you are the ministry of the army in that period. What you would do if you want to keep your soldiers from joining the other faction that is fighting against you, have to pay them more, and that's what you see there. They have to raise their wages and raise the wages because the other side was paying a better wage. And you see that a lot of people actually jump, like they start fighting from one side and then fighting for the other because they pay more. I don't know, this is a very interesting way. I wanted to do this just because of fun, and then I thought that it was cool, and I left it there. So I wanted to compare different revolutions with kind of the same type of events in terms of land redistribution, all that. So I have data from Mexico, this is Russia, it's China, and it's Cuba, right? All 20th century revolutions, all kind of leftist, or I mean, they're leftist. And what happened after their respective land redistribution? For example, in the case of Mexico, here, let's say this is the Constitution, the 1917 Constitution. So this actually regulates how that land will be redistributed. You see that inequality is not changing that much at that time. In Russia, you see clearly that it really destroys some of the upper classes and it goes completely down. In China, you see something kind of similar to Mexico. It doesn't change that much. In Cuba, of course, you see kind of the same effect as in Russia. So this tells you something about the type of revolution you have. Like this is a way moderate revolution compared to this one. But also this one has a characteristic that like the industrialization in Mexico takes place almost immediately after the revolution ends. Like when the government of Cárdenas starts, and then I mean, the Second World War starts, and then industrialization in Mexico as the US enters the war and demands more things, like for Mexico and other countries, they have way more investment, and you have structural changes here. Like in this time, even if you were having like the distribution of land, Mexico was no longer like the agrarian sector in the Mexican economy was not as important as before. So suddenly you have a policy that was aiming to redistribute wealth, redistributing land in a moment in which industry is what matters, not land, not that much. So that's why it doesn't have the same effect as in the other cases that were more rural in that sense, that the industry was not as important in the case of Mexico. So here we have an example in which is the pure like a structural force of the economy that is driving inequality rather than, I mean, of course, the policies that were like, they decided to tax something, but it was more like the structure rather than that makes that different. All these countries were more rural at that time, or that their rural sector was more important, I would say, is a better way of putting it. And then we move closer to the present, and this is a change of this is just a graph to show you the effect of this structural change in inequality. Here are different countries, like a selection of countries, some similar to Mexico and some not that similar, but all that had data for this period. And you see here like the the ratio between the top 20 and the bottom 20 here, just as an inequality measurement, because I had to normalize that because not all the countries had the same exact data. So it becomes a little complicated. And you have per capita growth here. So we have like 4 quadrants, I call them. This is like low growth and low inequality. This is like high growth, low inequality. This is like low growth and high inequality. And this is high growth and high inequality, right? Mexico ends in like sadly here, like the economy was growing. This is the years of the Milagro Mexicano, the Mexican miracle, when the economy was growing around 6% per capita per year. Sorry, 3% per capita per year, 6% like the growth rate. But inequality was extremely high. It was like the top 20 earned 20 times the bottom 20, right? And this is very different for countries like Taiwan, for example, or Japan, that were able to grow super fast and keep inequality at bay. So there's lessons there to be learned, like how these countries actually managed to do that. My hypothesis, this is something this is a chapter I'm still reviewing a little bit in the time I have before they publish, because my hypothesis, I'm not completely sure, is that is also related to the land reform on the countries that had land reform here. And there's, maybe you're familiar with the work Cristobal Cai. Like he has this very famous 2002 paper in which he compared like Latin American and Asian land reforms. And he claims that Asian land reforms were more radical in the sense that they really terminated the kind of their own hacendado classes or their landowner classes, and they were able to expel them from politics. Like they could still be rich and do whatever they wanted to do in the economy, but they could not influence politics. In the Mexican case, that's not the case. Like some of the former, like the old elite, the ancien regime, survives and regains a little bit of their wealth, but also regains influence in the new government. And they have veto powers. And those veto powers translate into failed fiscal reforms, failed attempts to create like a more universal social security system. Like the government wanted to create something more close to like the European way of social security, like Germany, like Sweden, like, you know, like England, the NHS. But that was not something that businessmen at that time were going to pay for. They fight against that, and then you end with these compromises in which you have this better than nothing social security, but not the full social security. So the urban population benefits, not the rural one. So inequality between the urban population maybe diminishes, but inequality between the overall population increases, because at that time Mexican population was growing super fast, and you still had like millions and millions of people in the rural sector. So to me, that's the stuff. But that's something that I'm still willing to be challenged on that and incorporate that maybe in the final version. And this is just to finish and just to summarize. Like this is more like the present. Like Mexico right now is like is in a low growth, high inequality, is a low growth, high inequality country. In the past, we at least grow fast, even if we were growing unequal. Now we are growing unequal and not growing in the economy, which is like super bad. It's the worst of the cases. And then we have a regressive fiscal structure. Like Mexico taxes is extremely regressive. I have a figure I didn't show you because I thought it was maybe too distracting. If I compare the progressivity of taxes between Mexico today and a kind of Renaissance state, and I had the data to do that, you would see that Mexico is more regressive than some, like the Venetian Republic, for example, the work of Guido Alfani and Marco Di Tullio and the lion's share, that book. You do the same exercise he does there, compare that time with Mexico now, not like 20 years ago, 30 years ago now. You will see that they're really close. And that's not something good to say, that your country in the 21st century kind of has the fiscal structure of a 16th century Renaissance republic. But yeah, such a thing, right? We have a very vicious cycle of inequality of results and opportunity. Feeds from all this history because it feeds to politics and to policy. And right now we are we have a country in which inequality is very important in discourse, like our government really cares in terms of the discourse about inequality. But it's not translated into policy actions. Like we don't have fiscal reforms. We don't have they are dismantling the social security system. Even if the past one was really bad, now it's still very bad. It's better than nothing. And we have this kind of situation, and it's very sad. To me, at least, it's very sad. And that's all. It's like a very brief overview. I'm sorry if I probably skip a lot of things. And also, I'm a bit nervous. So. But thank you. Ask me a question, please. Ask me a question.
Please do ask questions. We do have the room for 30 more minutes, so feel free to ask questions.
I have one.
Of course.
Can you use the mic? It's for the live stream.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. A lot of things to think, and probably I will ask questions over lunch and everything. But I remember reading a paper by Pablo Astorga.
Yes.
I think he's using your data at some point, right? And if I recall correctly, that paper was showing series for the 20th century, right? And that's income inequality. And I remember the series for Mexico used to look a bit more jumpy, right? Yes. And yours, the ones you were showing here, were a lot flatter. So could you please explain how would that happen, or like is there a main difference methodological?
No, it's the same data pretty much. But what is different is that in the Pablo Astorga paper, and in the paper I created the data firstly. It was like in 10 years intervals. So I was aggregating data in like 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950. And that creates like this more like jagged shape. In this case, I was able to collect more and more data, so I was able to disaggregate it more. So you still see like the same trend, but it's less extreme.
Okay. Does anyone?
Yes, well, thank you so much. I mean, I have many thoughts and probably many non-related questions, but I want probably to ask something, which is like, I am not an economist, but it seems to me that there is usually this kind of fixation with looking at the Gini as like a graph that by itself tell a lot of things, no? But considering your presentation, what it's like fantastic is that it does matter to see who wins and who loses between like those ups and downs, no? So what you show about the actors that these social tables that change and show who wins and who loses, etc. So my point is like, if you can tell a little bit more in terms of your contribution in how your work, let's say, complicates or adds some nuance in terms of, instead of fixating on the ups and downs of the Gini graph, one should also focus on the actors behind those ups and downs. And the other thing is that it's maybe politically a little bit frustrating that one can also see that wealth and inequality will always be concentrated, or has always been concentrated, no? So maybe I would like you to speculate a little bit in terms of probably a revolution, as one could have imagined before. It's not what ought to be done, but maybe something else. So I don't know if you have some kind of advice in terms of if a revolution is necessary, or a reform at East Asian cases, or I mean, if you can speculate about what ought to be done.
No, I mean, I hope revolution doesn't come. Like, I mean, the thing that like wars. Like, I think the lesson from equalization by means of violence is that it comes at a great cost, and they are way cheaper, not, I mean, in terms of life and in terms of structure and in terms of money, way to do it. Like that's, I think that's the lesson from these periods of equalization. What's happened? Taxes were happening. I mean, it's the common sense one. They were creating institutions, like institutions aimed at public services, like health, education, all this. What I think is that since Mexico hasn't completed its transition from like a pre-industrialized country to an industrialized one to a post-industrialized one, it has never like become a developing country. It has still opened like a lot of these policies. Like it's not that you could not make, I don't know, think of France. Like France will not become more equal if you keep increasing taxes. Like you cannot go and increase more taxes than already are in France, for example. But in Mexico, you have like taxes like are ridiculously low. Like you don't tax property pretty much. You don't tax like your income tax is not progressive at all. I mean, it's the richest man in Mexico. I don't think Carlos Slim, he pays the same rate as me, whoever. So. And it's the different inequality is just you cannot measure it. It's almost infinite, right? So I mean, you have. I don't think we need to reinvent the hot water. We just need to do what we know works. The thing is, I think it's more like a political question. Like if we are able to create the social pressure and the political incentives for actually governments to do what they know works, right? The thing is that, like, capture political interest, all that is what gets in the way. That, to me, that's more like the story. Like, it's not like the people in the 50s didn't know that. They actually, you read the economists at that time, like Eugenia Martinez, for example, an economist like that. You realize that they are very worried about inequality, and they want to enact policies for that. They want to tax more certain groups, introduce or increase the inheriting taxes, things like that. But it's always the political side of it that is that, oh yeah, this is a great idea, but the businessmen in Monterrey are going to be mad at us, and we need a boss next time, so don't do that. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Hi, congratulations, you've done very impressive research. I look forward to read your book. I have a question in terms of geography. I don't know if you got like, regional differences from your data, and I'm just curious about them. Particularly thinking about this approach to war and the effects of war, destructive or extractive, because I was thinking, okay, these wars have different battlegrounds, but not across Mexico. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of my PhD thesis. We look at that. I have regional data for that, for 26 of the 32 states. Good enough. And I can see actually the states in which they were battles, sieges, blockades, things like that, and see the difference in effects. And you see that, yeah, they have some differences. You could trace some. I mean, you will still need to control for more geographical aspects of it, like rivers, mountains. I don't know. There's a lot of things in battlefields. Who's commanding, whatever, the size of the armies, but you could do it like in a regional way. I mean, the data exists.
Here and over there, also monopolizing. Everyone has.
Oh, go
Wait,
to the.
he was first. Yeah, he was.
Okay. Sorry. So in the last graph, thank you for your presentation. It was really, I look forward to reading the book. In the last graph, no, the one before. What was the one before? Yeah, what was the difference in between? What's the threshold to say who's a hacendado, a rancher, and a small owner? And why is it that small owners lose so much wealth and ranchers gain so much wealth? What's the mechanism that makes a difference where like by the 1940s, they were like giving property to the small owners, right? So what's really the mechanism that drives that, which really is not obvious, yes, but it's obvious that's present, right? That it happens and you show it there.
Yeah, well, there are two ways you can classify it. First is, I mean, in the sources, they are named like that. And he's an hacienda owner, or he's a ranchero, so you can actually, you know that. But if you want to homogenize this the way I do, what I do is to create like a, look at the size of the land holdings. Like, so if they own more than 5 hectares of land, then that's likely an hacienda. If they own between 1,000 and 4,000, that's like a ranch. If they're small landholders, it's just they own a plot of land that they use for harvest, what they consume and consumption, all that. And what's the mechanism? I think the mechanism is pretty much that ranchers are the ones who want revolution. Like you think of Álvaro Obregón, you think of Calles, you think of all these guys. They were ranchers in Sonora, or they were ranchers in Coahuila. Like Carranza, yeah, he was more like an hacendado, very rich guy. Madero was like he was really an hacendado. But at the end, the revolution created the circumstances in which a new political elite emerged, and that political elite was experiencing a lot of social mobility. They started like very poor or middle class at the time of the revolution, and they ended become I mean, by the 1920s and 1930s, they were the heads of the states, and they were like able to invest in their own lands. And for example, the case of Obregón is I think is very telling. Like he's the big general, like he wins the revolution, then Carranza is president, and while Carranza is president, to thank him because of his services when he was general, he invests a lot in the Sonoran region in which he had land. So his lands increase in value, like just and then when he became president, he does even more of that. And then after he becomes president, like the guys that came after him, Calles, and then the guys in the Maximato, they keep like kind of paying those that fought in the revolution. They were like the winning faction, so they just reap a lot of those benefits. And they create this kind of corporativist structure in which you were with us, you get benefits, pretty much. Like some of the workers that fought, for example, the Red Battalions, they were like in the states of Veracruz, and they were workers that joined the revolution. They like, oh yeah, we allow you to strike more, and we will allow you to have more like liberties in the way you manage your own affairs, and as long as you keep like attached with the regime, with the new regime. So you have this kind of political economy process in which you have some winners and losers all the time, and it happens that those are the guys who are in the winning side. So to me that's the mechanism. It's not like in the structure of the economy. It's not actually like something was happening in the economy itself, more than that investment. Yeah.
If I could just do a follow up on that, sorry. And would it be maybe also interesting or to separate like between small owners and like communities, which become like the ejidos, and you see how that also changed? Do you have something on that, or do you know what happens in there?
I think that's a very cool idea, but I'm not sure if I could do it with the data I have, because I have data in individuals. So for communities, it would be really hard to like how I mean, an ejido could have like I don't know 100, 200 people, whatever, living there, right? So how will I assign like incomes, right? Or how will I say that when like this small side of I have a way to actually allocate the difference. So that would be problematic. But if there were some methodology way to do it, it would be really cool.
Okay, thank you.
So I just, oh, sorry. No. You guys have been silent.
We've been patient.
Thank you so much, Diego. Your work is awesome, impressive. Thank you for coming. I just have one question regarding the land reforms that you mentioned. So in which sense Mexico's land reform was success or not? I think it took probably too much time, like 70 years. I don't know if that was a little bit or not, but what's the difference between those countries that made a successful reform?
I think there were two big ones. One, it started really slow and then it gained a lot of momentum. Like with Obregón, with Carranza, it was really small, and with Obregón, it accelerates. Then with Calles and in the Maximato, it slows again. Then with Cárdenas, it was the best moment of land reform. And then it kind of goes up until the 90s with Salinas at the chance. But the difference, I think, is that the governments in this, for example, in the Asian cases, they had more capacities. They were stronger governments. In the case of the Mexican governments at the time, they required larger coalitions to keep themselves in power. So that made them, that forced them to compromise with different groups, and that enabled those groups to remain important, or to kind of have some veto power in certain policies. And also because they distribute the land that got redistributed not always was the best land. So the productivity in those places couldn't rise over time as much as in the other places. The best land they didn't redistribute. That was they negotiated with these guys, and it was like, I will take this land, I will give you like the best plot. But so you are there and see this huge difference in productivity over time, in part because of that.
I'll ask now. First of all, thanks for your talk. It was really wonderful. I was curious, you had the quadrant chart.
Yes.
Where you had Mexico in the alto crecimiento y desigualdad sector in 1965 to 80. And I think the popular conception here in the United States is that growth and inequality are largely products of NAFTA. But you're suggesting that this is a problem that predates NAFTA. And I'm looking at this, and I'm not a Mexicanist, but I'm thinking this is a period of ISI, like this is a period of remarkable growth. Do these policies not have any measurable effect on inequality in Mexico? Was the trend line already moving in that direction and NAFTA simply accelerated it?
I think the NAFTA just accelerated, but I think it's part of it's an intersection of structural change and the demographic transition that explains this to me. Like at this time, like Mexico around 1920, it was, I don't know, I think 20 million people, something like that. And by that time, by 1965, it's already like 70, something like 69 million people, something like that. So just population just exploded. And urbanization was not going as fast, like industrialization was like the rhythm at which the economy was industrializing was not fast enough to absorb the population growth and the migration from the rural sector to the city. So even if you were creating a lot of jobs and the economy was growing super fast and you were creating some institutions like IMSS, something like that, social security, they never had enough money or enough capacity to actually absorb what the rhythm at the way population was growing. So and then you have this structural change happening, which creates winners and losers in these different sectors. So then, and I think those combine in a way, like structural change create gains for the industrial sector, mostly urban, and losses for the rural sector, mostly, I mean, for agriculture, mostly rural. And then these people are migrating, since they cannot make their living in the rural sector, they are migrating to the cities. Within the cities, they cannot actually integrate to the formal sector as easily, or they cannot be absorbed. There are not enough jobs. So you have in this situation, the economy is still growing, but the disparities between urban and the rural sector are increasing, and population keeps increasing. So that's keep going, and they feed themselves. And that's why around this time they create this huge campaign. It was called Para Familia Pequeña Vive Mejor, the small family live better, in which they try to get down they were in 7.5 women per child per woman, something like that, around the 50s, for example, and they like the 80s, it's around 2 point something. They are very successful in that, but they start doing that like in the 70s, when they should have started that in the 40s. So you have this 30-year period, the economy is growing super fast, but it cannot, like you have these other structural forces going around that are preventing that for sure. And then you have the crisis in the 80s and in the 90s and the NAF and all this, and that just amplifies what was already there. And I think that's the story.
Thank you.
Masses are gathering, I think.
Is there a question over there? No, just then if I may, one question. It has to do with the thought experiment, and it struck me as a bit of stark differentiation between the military and bureaucrat employees, because of course at this time there was a lot of recruitment into government from the military. 1940s was the last, we had the last general's president. So how is it easy to identify from your sources like a stark differentiation between belonging to the army and being a bureaucrat?
No, I don't differentiate. Like if you are in the army, I put you in the army. If you are in any other branch of government, you will become a bureaucrat. Even if you are like a high bureaucrat, like the president or minister, that's like high bureaucracy. If you are just like you are the guy who are at the window, like giving licenses, private licenses, whatever, then you are just in bureaucracy, average bureaucracy. You could do that, but if you do that, you will then see like you will miss for example, these developments like in the 1830s or in other periods in which the military becomes really important. And because you will think, oh, it's government, just like people are getting rich, just corruption, whatever. This still could be the case. You disagree, but you see that there are other aspects of it that are more telling, or I would say dangerous, or they offer lessons of why it's not wise to, for example, militarize your own country. Thinking about certain current issues.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm obsessed about data.
Yeah. And me too.
No, I'm asking, like, my question is, so at the beginning you said that you were using wheels to reconstruct the distribution of wealth. What do you do?
Okay, so wheels, like they look like that. I mean, they are just all paper with numbers.
So just to get it clear, those wheels are, you have them at the moment of death, right? It's like an estate tax or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily, because you can leave your will and like, I don't know, like a year before or something, but it's close to that. You could still have some variations, that's true, because maybe at the very end of his life, he didn't amend the will and something changed. But I think it still will capture the trend fairly well. You have issues with this, of course. Like you have some representativity issues, like you know that this type of source is biased towards older and richer people. Like,
do you make any adjustments?
Yes, a lot.
Based on what? Because then you have the census data, right? So do you have multipliers? Like
I try to do that state multiplier, but the thing is that you don't have age of death. I mean, you have the date they died, but they don't know for all the cases if they were 80 years or 30 years, things like that. So you could do the state multiplier method, but then you will get like weird results because you cannot do it for part of the data, and then you will have to guess like, and then I think that will increase like the uncertainty of it. So what I did is in this like in this case, for example, what I did is to created some parametric or quasi-parametric approaches. I fit like log normals, Paretos, Sigma Dallas, all these type of different parametric distributions to the data to assign different weights to the parts of the distribution, and then like you will see it in the appendix because this. I check all these different distributions that emerge and to see if they are consistent, and they more or less look the same. Like you will see some variations, and with that you are adjusting, you are correcting for this bias of the bias is towards the upper tail, so you are trying to assign more weight to the lower tail. For that one, you can correct. For H's, that's different. That's difficult to correct because you don't have the state multiplier method. So, and the other one is doing constructing social tables, like for example, creating well social tables, and then you have the different. I mean, you have in the will what that guy was doing. You know that he's in the military. He's like a sit down and whatever. You create groups, and then you weight with that
And,
using the census data and all that.
So these people, the people in the wheels, would be what, 1% of the population, more than that, less than that?
The current population in Mexico at the time.
Yeah.
You mean? They were 180. Yeah, I would say like 3%, something like that, 2 point something percent.
So the total amount, let's say you have the distribution and then you have an average or something, you are extrapolating everything from the wheel, right?
Yes.
And okay, and yeah, what? Do you have you ever checked how the average looks like of those distributions? Because you get a distribution, right?
Yeah,
And then you will see the evolution of the average wealth of Mexico over
Yes.
200 years.
Yeah.
It would be interesting.
Yeah.
Does it look nice? Or?
You could tell like this, like you see the jumps, you could tell you do that for each like decade. You could tell like something is happening in some decades. So yeah, it tells you a similar story.
But it's jumping.
Yeah, it's jumping, exactly.
Okay.
And actually that graph is there.
Okay.
I think it's harder to explain. Right?
Well, I think that's a good place to finish. So, thank you everyone